Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I have been doing for a while now. I do these on every Sunday except for the first Sunday of the month is a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're proud of that I include in that video. The email address to send photos for that video is right here. Just include in the title something like subscriber photos or something like that so that I know what they are. I get quite a few emails, as you can imagine, to this email address. I got quite a few questions from this past week. I won't be able to get to them all. I expect this next week to be slow, so the Sunday after Christmas, I will include some of those that I've missed from this week. Just an update on this yard. I did not get that shade planting video shot this week. I have been, I had a lot, personal things and that kind of thing, and just, family time and that kind of thing. And I am about to tear the back off the back of the house though, and so there'll be photos probably during Christmas week on Instagram. If you don't follow me over on Instagram, I'll eventually do a video back here. I've shot before a video of what the back of this house looks like before the screen porch and the siding and everything comes off and the new porch goes on and that kind of thing. So there'll eventually be a video for it, but if you kind of want to follow along with that, like we did the shed over here, which the shed, hoping to be able to finish the painting on the shed this week because it's finally going to be back in the 60s. We've had kind of a below normal month. Anyway, well, let's get to some questions from this past week. Interestingly, I got a Nandina question about them being poisonous to birds. I answered this question in last week's video, and then I cut it out because the video was already 16 or 17 minutes long, and that answer was like 3 minutes. And so I didn't include it in last week's video. When I'm talking about Nandinas on this channel, I'm talking about newer varieties that, don't flower and don't berry, so therefore they don't have the berries on them to either be, number one, a noxious weed, meaning they get carried all over the place. The seeds move around and they become noxious weeds. And number two, if they are in fact, poisonous to some creature, that they're not on the plants. And so I'm not talking about Nandina domestica. There's actually, I don't know if you can see, it's probably out of focus back here right behind me. There's some red berries along the fence line. That's a Nandina domestica. There's one on the other fence line as well. They're everywhere. It's a plant that was introduced a long time ago and people still use them, and they're actually great for holiday decorating and that kind of thing. But Nandinas are literally everywhere. There's nothing that can be done about it. But those aren't the actual ones I'm shooting the videos on. But regardless, I want to address this bird berry issue. This is another thing where the internet is absolutely positively broken. That story about the birds being killed by the Nandina berries is a 2009 story in Georgia where some birds stopped, and obviously they were hungry. They were off course, whatever they were. They ate Nandina berries. Not only did they eat Nandina berries, which are probably mildly toxic, they ate so many of them, and almost, if you eat too much of anything, it can be dangerous. And so they just gorged themselves on Nandina berries, and then they were found dead. Okay, there's not another story. This plant was probably introduced in this country 150, I don't know how long ago. Nandinas have been here. They're all over the southeast United States. They grow wild, like I say, in the woods. They're naturalized at this point. Might as well call them natives, honestly. Nothing anybody can do about it. They can get them out of their yard, but they can't get them out of the woods. If they killed birds in mass quantities, there'd be dead birds everywhere, but there's just not. And if you search, do Nandinas kill birds? There's 800 stories about it. They're all that 2009 story in Georgia. This is again where the internet is kind of broken, I think, and you get one story can become the whole backdrop for an entire thing. It can just be spread like wildfire, and that's what's happened with that story. Are Nandina berries toxic? Yes. Are the birds dumb enough to eat them? No. And so otherwise we'd have dead birds all over the place. That's the answer. But like I say, I'm not recommending that type of Nandina anyway, nor am I saying let's go plant Nandinas because they don't kill birds. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say there. Okay, somebody asked me about, they have some, I guess maybe inherited or somebody cut their crepe myrtles back really hard. We call it crepe murder, late winter or during the winter every year. A lot of the landscapers, cut the crepe myrtles way back. People call it crepe murder. A lot of homeowners follow suit because they see them in shopping centers where the landscapers are doing it. And the question is, is there something you need to do to it to get it to recover over time? And no, it's just going to take time. The garden center where I shot a lot of the videos for this channel, 2 years ago, when I had my garden center, when I inherited that building, all the crepe myrtles on that property had been done to them repeatedly. I just did nothing. In 4 or 5 years later, they were perfect. You could still see the knots where at the height where they had been cut just a little bit, but even that was starting to go away. So it's just time for them to recover. They will look funny for a little while, but there's nothing you could do to speed that along. So if you inherit crepe myrtle or somebody butchers your crepe myrtle, time is the thing that will eventually heal it, and they will look normal again in the future. I'm not opposed to this type of the butchering of crepe myrtles that landscapers are doing in commercial settings. They're trying to keep the plants at a certain height, to not take over the entire parking lot. And keep in mind, they don't care if the plant lives 30 years. I mean, it's a commercial landscape. They're gonna tear the plants out at some point in all likelihood and switch them out with something else anyway. So the fact that they're making them look weird over a 10 or 15 year period of time just doesn't matter to them. So that's that time. Somebody asked me about the cuttings that I had taken at the old house before I left. I actually took them to a friend's nursery. I've kind of kept my head down and not answered this question or talked about it, but I did take them to a friend's nursery because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get this metal building out and this greenhouse built in time, but I will update them in the spring. Once I get that hoop house built, I'll have them magically back over here was my plan, but somebody did ask the question, but they're in someone else's hoop house right now at another nursery. Somebody asked me about plants on a dry shade slope, and that's a difficult space. I think if you have dry shade with a slope, you probably are going to have to use drip irrigation, unfortunately, to really grow things well. The only thing that would probably, mondo grass would definitely fill that space out. Hellebores do a fantastic job in dry shade and even on a slope. The first year though, year or two, you keep in mind you would have to give them additional water. Not going to be able to plant something in that dry shade slope and walk away. You're going to have to get it established. But hellebores, what else? The dwarf Japanese plum yew video that I put up yesterday, that'd be another one that I would take a look at for ground cover on a dry shaded slope. Okay, somebody asked me about deer, if there was any kind of secrets I had, because they're overwhelmed by them, and the only thing is a fence. Anything else, somebody's just lying to you. The North Carolina Botanical Garden in Chapel Hill, North Carolina has got probably an 8-foot fence all the way around it. They're not having volunteers go pee on plants or go spray things that will be washed off when it rains or anything like that. Fencing is really the only technique. The only technique I've ever had pretty good success with around my vegetable garden. At the other house, one year, somehow they came up. I had a creek that ran around that subdivision, but I was high enough up in that subdivision that I never really had a problem. The one year I actually laid the fence netting, the deer fence netting, rather than putting it up as a fence, I laid it on the ground, and they do not like to walk on that stuff, I don't believe. It eliminated the damage immediately. So if I had an immediate need to stop them from walking someplace, that 6-foot tall netting laid out on the ground, they're weird about walking on it for whatever reason. But that's, like I say, it's temporary. It really does need to be fenced. Somebody asked me about removing bamboo, and I have to say that when we're talking about removing invasive plants, like that Nandina would be an example behind me. I've got ivy creeping in back here on the back line. When we're talking about removing invasive plants, you have to think about the time frame being different than removing other things. You're not going to get it all at one time. And so you need to go out, get up what you can, and then stay on top of it. So as it reemerges, anytime it reemerges, you're popping it back out of the ground. But I think you just have to stay at those things. So in order for me to remove this ivy back here, I'm going to rip it out. I'm going to try to get, I'll get what I can out of there physically. And then it's going to try to come back. And every single time it tries to come back, I'm going to hit it quick, because if it's in the sunlight for very long, it'll build up energy, rebuild up the roots, and then you're like starting from scratch every time. You don't want to do that. So every time it reemerges, get it as quick as possible. But your time frame on removing a noxious weed is not like other things. It's going to take probably 2 years of repeatedly doing that. Somebody asked me about dog pee on plants, and I don't know of anything that'll keep them from peeing on plants, but I do know that, I've done landscape jobs over the last few years, and more apartment buildings, commercial properties, so many people have dogs that are coming out of the building and just peeing on the plants right in front of the building. And so this has become a big issue. You definitely need to be using salt-tolerant plants if you have a male dog that's causing you problems. And so I may, at some point, I mentioned it in some videos, and I mentioned it in yesterday's that dwarf plum-yew video, that it's salt-tolerant. Indian hawthorns, hydrangeas. There's a lot of plants that are actually just kind of more tolerant of it. So salt-tolerant plants, I may make a playlist at some point with the plants that I know that I have covered over time being salt-tolerant. When I do that, I'll say that I did it. Let's see. Okay. Somebody said they had 2 bags of tulips that they hadn't planted or done anything with, and could they just save them for next year, go ahead and plant them? Now, I just go ahead and put them in the refrigerator now. If you haven't already done something with them since you asked me this question, you can still put them in the refrigerator now, but before you do that, look at them and make sure none of them are rotten, because at this point, some of them have probably gotten soft. So one at a time, go through them, make sure they're still firm, put them in the refrigerator, and you can still refrigerate them right through the end of January. I did it last year with some, or maybe a year before last. Some that I put in very late. And you can just plant them at the beginning of February. They'll come up almost immediately. So just keep that in mind. You know, whenever they go in the ground at that point, they're going to come up. They won't be quite as big as they were, but they'll be fine. They'll bloom very nicely. Okay, real quick, I got 2 questions that I want to answer with this book. This book is called Eco Farm, an Acres USA Primer. This is the 3rd or 4th copy I've had of this book. I've actually given it away a couple times. I did a video a long time ago on what books I recommended, and I didn't mention this book because it's really kind of a textbook. It's a primer, it's easy to read, but it is a bit of a textbook. So it's not something I'll link it below from Amazon, but I don't think it's something people are going to want to necessarily read. But I read this book when I was 21 or 22 years old, and it completely woke me up to understanding how in modern agriculture and modern horticulture we treat the problem after the problem is there, and we never ask the correct questions. We always ask the question of how to get rid of something, an insect or a disease problem, after it happens, and we don't look at it and go, I wonder why it gets this problem over and over and over again. That's how farmers would have done it pre-industrial revolution. But this book was written in 1979, woke a lot of people up to it probably is one of the drivers for, honestly, the organic food movement, really. And I use it when I get a question for these question and answer videos. It always takes me back. A lot of them take me back to this book. And right at the beginning of the book, there were 7 things that he set out to. The gentleman's name is Charles Walters. He set out to prove with this book. And one of them is insect and nature's predators are a disposal crew. They are summoned when they are needed, and they are repelled when they are not needed. Okay, and so when I get a question, and basically they're summoned because the plant's in a weakened state. Okay, so insects, chewing insects especially, are summoned to plants when something is out of balance in that plant. Mother Nature comes along and destroys things that are in a weakened state, and so that other things don't get those same problems. And so I've always carried that with me. So when I get a question, somebody asked me about their having aphids on their succulents. Okay, and you go out to the desert and the succulents don't have aphids on them. They have aphids in somebody's house or in their garden at home. And we can use insecticidal soap or wash them off with water, which is typically how I deal with aphids. I just power wash them off. But we do need to come back around and ask the question, why do they repeatedly get aphids? And the answer is something is, in all likelihood, they're not getting enough sunlight, or frequently in modern horticulture and agriculture, we overstimulate plants. So we over-fertilize them. Or we're using peat-based soils where that succulent came from a very lean desert soil. Or the pH in that peat moss is too low, where that desert soil the pH was maybe neutral or even even above 7, that kind of thing. And so ask yourself the question, treat them, but ask yourself the question, am I giving them enough light? Am I giving them too much of a good thing? Is the soil too rich? Am I over fertilizing them? that kind of thing, because that will invite insect problems. So another question I got this week was somebody had bought some rhododendrons from a garden center or a box store or someplace. They had rescued them at the end of the season, and they've already got some winter burn on them. Okay, they took them home, they didn't plant them, they just put some leaves around the pots. We're gonna keep them through the winter, but they've already shown some signs of winter damage. Okay, and again, this book, you know, like I say, it has its 7 points it was trying to prove in this book, and one of them I always remember is crop losses in dry weather or during mild cold snaps are not so much the result of drought and cold as nutrient deficiency. So that always pops back in my mind that what's happening with your rhododendrons is that the fertilizer had run out. And so the garden center or the box store, whoever had received them, they were in great shape. They had them there for some period of time. The slow release fertilizer in the container actually ran out over time. Maybe they started to look off color or whatever. They moved them over to the clearance area. Then you come along, purchase them, take them home, and they're in a soil media that really doesn't have anything to offer the plant. It's just the fertilizer that's added to it that continues to feed the plant. Once it's gone, you know, they're pretty lean in these containers. You know, once that happens, if you can't put them in the soil at this point, continue just to keep them protected, keep the roots protected, and then get them in the ground as soon as possible at the end of winter. Fertilize them a little lightly at the same time, but the soil would have nutrients in them that would, you know, would help them out drastically. But you can't really do anything about it now in that container. I guess you could try to add a little fertilizer to them, but I don't think it would absorb it or take it up. They're not growing, so I don't think you could fix it. But like I say, again, a lot of what I know is built upon this book, and this book waking me up to paying attention, you know, and to rather than constantly ask the same question over and over and over again, you know, to ask the why. Why does it keep happening over and over and over again? Or what when I'm seeing these things, you know, what is the root cause of them? So anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll be back next Sunday with a question and answer video, another question and answer video. And like I say, I doubt I'll get as many questions, so I'll go back and get a few more of those from this past week. Thanks again.